So here we are at the start of project 3, right? And as we usually start off, we start off by creating a new project when we create a new project, right? For a couple of videos, we just set projects because we've already created it, right? There's only 6 projects total this term, even though we do 2 models per project, and we do a couple of videos for each project. But this is the start of a new project. So of course, we want to go to File, and we want to go to Project Window, right? So File, Project Window. And that, of course, brings this up. And remember, projects are really just kind of these localized it's going to create a folder with this name, although I'm going to change it in a minute here. And what it does is it creates a bunch of subfolders, right, or folders inside of this folder, scenes, your source images, where you can put all your stuff at. You can put all of your Maya scenes for your different models in the scenes folder, of course, and any reference pictures or even textures can go in the images folders. Remember, projects are great because if you need to take them to different computers, when you set a project, it uses kind of this folder and all of these scenes so that everything knows where to look, right? Because remember, things, particularly images and source images, pictures, whether they're textures or reference images, are outside things, right? They're JPEGs, they're Targas, they're PNGs. In some cases, they can be Photoshop documents, right? And so those aren't actually in Maya, right? Maya is just looking for these outside of itself and loading them in. And so by using projects, when you set a project and have everything saved in the proper folders, it knows where to point everything. And so when you load your scene up, everything loads in properly. If you don't use projects, sometimes you can kind of not know where everything's at, and that can kind of be annoying. You have to go search for it. So it's good organizationally. But remember also, particularly if you move around to different computers, those directories can be changed, and so it makes it really easy to start up your project and everything knows where it's at and it knows where to look for things and load them in. That's what's great about projects. So we'll go new, and in this case, we're going to just kind of do our standard naming convention, right? So it's going to be DA 240. And you can always do it the DA 240 later, of course. Intro to 3D modeling, right? If we wanted to, we could even, of course, cancel this really quick and go back to project window. And you can see it's kind of using that same naming convention from there. If I wanted to, I could even kind of try to copy that or whatever. But you see it's kind of right there. We do new. See if it'll paste in there. Oops, my bad. Anyways, you can see that was the naming convention though. So DA, intro to 3D modeling. And then, of course, we can do 240, and then we can do underscore, and of course, this is summer, right? Summer 20, so SU20, underscore your name, and then, of course, underscore. And it's always better to save your, particularly 3D files and things like that, digital files with underscores. Sometimes some file formats support spacing weird. So oftentimes when you see naming conventions, you'll see underscores used instead of space. And of course, this is project 3. So we'll do project 3. There we go. And this is basically naming convention, right? The class, basically. And that doesn't bother me if you have this slightly out of order, or if you maybe shorten intro to 3D modeling to intro to 3D, that stuff. I'm like, I'm not going to sweat that stuff too much. But it's basically the class, the term, your name, the project. That's really what you want, and underscores in the naming convention. Remember, it's just really trying to get you guys used to naming conventions. And then, of course, I'm going to hit the folder so I can kind of browse to just save it on the desktop. You guys, of course, can save it anywhere you want to. So we'll select, let's go into desktop, we've got a name, we hit accept, and there's our project. Now, of course, we can go File, Set Project, right? You only have to go to Project Window when you want to create a new one. Otherwise, if you're just working with the same project, you just go File, Set, and that makes it the active project. And then we can see, there it is, Set. There we go. So that's set. We're kind of good to go there. Now, I'm going to briefly go to the internet here because I want to get a desk, right? Because that's what we're starting to make is our desk. Now, ideally, I'd like you guys to have wood desks because it'll be more interesting for us to texture. It's pretty easy to get some nice wood textures when we do texturing later on in Project 5. Also, it's quite important. You don't have to have it be symmetrical like this one. If yours is asymmetrical, that's fine. But the biggest thing is I want you to have at least 2 drawers, right? So you can see this picture's got 2 drawers. I also really want you guys to have gaps, space in between the drawers, because this is going to allow me to kind of show you how to avoid building and having a 6-star here, which can make the bevel tool do weird. That's what we're going to see a little more in our later videos. So the biggest thing is obviously all desks have to have legs and a tabletop, so that goes without saying. You don't have to have it symmetrical. If you only have a couple of drawers on one side and then the other side's not like that, oftentimes you can kind of see drawer desks that aren't symmetrical, right? That's fine. But at least on one of the sides, you have to have 2 drawers. And they have to be kind of in the same cabinet. And ideally, not even ideally, I really want you to have that space. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this file to Canvas so that if you guys really are having a hard time finding one and you want to do one that you know is exactly what I'm looking for, this would be there. And that way you can even use this as a reference for what we're looking for. But remember, the biggest thing is 2 drawers at a minimum. If it's got 3 or 4, that's fine, right? But 2 drawers at a minimum. They have to kind of be stacked on top, and there really should be space, right? So there's kind of like a border here. That really is going to allow us to kind of explore stars for the first time and some of the problems they can cause. So this is going to work well for my desk, so I'm just going to, save image as. And of course I can go to my project 3, right, which should be right here because I just created that, project 3. And of course I can go to source images, right, so you can just go into your folders and stuff like that. And in this case I'm just going to, that's huge, I'm just going to call it desk, right. Usually JPEGs should be fine, but if for whatever reason the JPEG's not loading in, try to find a different file format, or maybe open it in Photoshop and kind of, or any imaging editing file that you have that's free, and maybe save it as something else. But that should work well for us. I'm going to go back to Maya. And of course, one of the first things we want to start with is creating our image plane, right? So we're going to go create free image plane. There we go. And of course, that drops in an image plane. So remember, create free image plane right there. And then that's dropped in there. It's already selected, right? It's green wireframe. But remember, if you left click off, right, you'll see it's kind of like a magenta, kind of pinkish purplish color. If you left click on kind of the actual wires, right, the actual edges here, it'll select it, right? Oftentimes if you select somewhere else, it won't, so you have to kind of click right on the edges. But it's green when it's in object mode, right? Remember, object is the object level selection. If you hold down the right mouse button, you should usually see that. But in this case, it's already selected, so we're good. So in this case, what we need to do is we need to go to Attribute Editor, right? It's right here on the side. Control A is the toggle for it, though, right? So you see Control A will kind of toggle between Attribute Editor and Channel Box Layer Editor. So we'll click on Attribute Editor. And usually by default, it goes to Image Plane Shape 1. But remember, you do have these different tabs up here. So for whatever reason it doesn't go to that, just click on this one. And then, of course, we can see down here, Image Name. And you can select this folder. Now you'll notice that you can kind of play around with the display modes, even alpha gain. If you go down here, you can change the color space. We're not going to do normal maps, of course, this term, but particularly if you want to do normal maps right and have them show up correctly in Arnold Renderer, you need to change the color space to raw, actually. And you'll see there's some other options down here, so you can always kind of go in and play with some of the other properties with your image if you want to. But usually we're fine just loading default stuff in. So we go to image name, the little folder. Click on that, and there's our desk JPEG, because it's automatically when you click on reference image stuff, it takes you to source images, and that's why we save that desk in there. We'll hit open, and there's our JPEG. In this case, I'm just going to go close that because we're good there, and there we go. Bring up Modeling Toolkit again. And remember, Channel Box Layer Editor, Modeling Toolkit, Attribute Editor are all on the side here. There are also these buttons right up here too. Okay, so in this case, we also want to make sure that this is set to the proper size, right? So we go Windows, Settings, Preferences, Preferences. And of course, there's lots of different preferences in here. We've talked about it. Each time I create a new project, you kind of talk about it, right? You can turn things off and on. If you don't want it to highlight what's new in the release, you turn that off so you don't see green on certain functions. You turn user interface elements off, right? Toolbox is this right here. So if you don't want to see that, you don't have to. Display can give you some options for certain display properties. This is where if you're working on a really old computer and you're having a hard time, like the manipulators won't let you select them and manipulate. That's because you might have an old enough computer that core profile won't work on it. You change your rendering engine to OpenGL Legacy. Usually you have to restart them. Manipulators, you can go and change manipulator sizes and some other functions like hide when you hold down a certain quick key. You can even use reposition using middle mouse button. I prefer to use the middle mouse button as the whatever you last moved one. Of course, down here, Files, Projects, that's where your autosave's at, right? And you have options and preferences for autosave. The autosave goes into your project. So if you're looking for those autosave files, particularly if you've been using a project and you've enabled this, it'll put those in a folder called autosave in your project. Color management, if you need to change around color management for different stuff, the default should be fine for us, but sometimes you're in a different studio, they have a different color management set up for whatever they're exporting to or whatever. Of course, further down, undos, you can control the amount of undos. Things like that, some selection preferences. The defaults are usually fine, but you kind of change those if you want. And of course, settings. That's really where we wanted to go. Some of you guys might notice that the time is not in the settings anymore in 2020, and I'm working on 2019 because that's what I had downloaded last, and the verification process now is a little bit more crazy, so I haven't gotten employment verification yet. So it doesn't really matter though, because there's really very little that actually nothing we're using in our class that's going to matter for 2020 versus 2019. But you don't see that in here. It's actually in the time slider now. Actually, it's in there even in 2019. So if you're ever looking for that frame rate, right, FPS, frames per second, it is in the time slider now instead of settings. But for me, it's in settings still. Of course, you can change up access, and of course, working units, right? So we can actually click on working units and set it from centimeter to meter. There's nothing really wrong with using centimeters. It's just that you'd have to make your grid a lot larger, right? Because the default centimeters is like grid units are really about 10 by 10, right? You'd have to really, to build things to scale, you'd have to have hundreds of centimeters. If you wanted to change your grid, right, you just go to display grid here. You can turn it off, but you can also go to the options box for it, and you can tell it to have a lot more units, right? So you have the ability to control how many units you want for your grid. So let's say I did this to say be like 30, right? And now you'll see there's 30 more grid units, right? We're not going to need that, but it's good to know that if you do really want to work with centimeters, you're working in a studio with centimeters, you just leave the default centimeters and you just make your grid bigger, basically. It has more units. But that's just in the display grid options box, and you can do that kind of stuff, right? So kind of good to know about that you have those controls there. I just want to kind of make sure you guys get to see that stuff. All right. Can you change color of axes and all that stuff? So kind of some neat stuff there, but the biggest thing probably that you find most useful will be that. If you ever wanted to work in centimeters instead of meters, but it's just a little easier for us to work in meters, not have really dense grids. Now, when you think about a desk, desks are usually going to be several feet long, right? When you actually think about it, they're probably going to be about 4.5 feet, right? So this desk really should be, and sometimes even 6 foot, right? So this desk should take up most of 2 grid units. Because remember, a meter is 3 feet, so 2 grid units is 6 feet. So remember, the image plane select, and if it's not, remember you just click on the edge, it selects it. R for scale, right? All your manipulators right here, R for scale. You could, of course, left click drag on that center one because that scales all 3 axes at the same time, right? And we could scale this up to, and I think this one's probably fairly wide, so it'll probably not quite 6 feet, but probably not far off from it. So it should be close to 2 grid units large. There we go. Now, I don't like my reference images to be on the 0 because I'm going to build on the 0. That's always useful, particularly if you've got symmetry. So I'm just going to hit W for move, right? W is your quick key for move. Remember, they're all right here, though. And I'm just going to left click drag on the blue arrow, right? Because that's our Z axis. I'm just going to move it back, right? And I'm moving it back. I'm moving it in the opposite direction the arrow's pointing. See how the arrow's pointing this way? I'm moving it this way. Because that way, when you actually look in front view, it'll actually be properly behind the object, right? If I moved it forward, it'll be in front of your object when you look at it in, say, this view right here, right? Your front view. You can actually even see it when I move it back. See how the grid shows up? So keep in mind that if you want your stuff in the default viewports to not be in front of your model, better to kind of move it back, right? Remember, tapping spacebar minimizes, maximizes your viewports, right? So I tap spacebar, it minimizes perspective. Whatever viewport I put my cursor over, right? Tap spacebar, it maximizes that. Tap spacebar minimizes. So remember, you can minimize, maximize that stuff. All right, so now I've got this started. I've got my reference image loaded in. I'm going to quickly save this project so we have it saved. So we'll go File, Save Scene As. So here's what I did when I first started off. And remember, it goes right to scenes. And in this case, I can just copy most of this, right? So let's copy that, kind of down here, paste it. And we'll just undo the back part up to project 3. And we'll do underscore desk, right? So when you're actually saving the scene files, you want to use that same naming convention, but you will add underscore desk or underscore clock radio, which is what the next model we're going to do in this project. And then we can hit save as. There we go. And the default my binary is a fine format for us to use, right? Because it's a little more efficient in terms of size. and most of you guys don't really know enough to actually change the programming for my ASCII files. So my ASCII files are bigger because remember you can basically hack them. You can go in and open them in Word and actually change some of the code in there. My binary you can't. Other than that though, they're basically the same. They're both stable. They'll both contain all the normal modeling information. If you're really not a programmer, no real reason to use my ASCII. And you notice my binary is on by default. So the default's usually fine. They just give you the option for my ASCII if you need that extra functionality. Remember, your file size will be bigger though with my ASCII because it has to be able to contain that extra editable information that you can change in like Word, right, or WordPad. All right, so our reference image is there. Now the nice thing is that this desk is really going to mostly be the end table, right? I'm going to show you a little bit of new stuff, right? I'm going to show you some snap together tools. I'm going to show you some snap precision tools with snap to vertex. We haven't really talked about that yet. And we're going to talk about how to avoid having a 6-star right here, right? But remember, this is basically the kind of desk I want you to have, right? Don't go willy-nilly pick whatever desk you want. Listen to what I'm saying at the beginning of this video, right? I'm telling you guys what kind of things are mandatory for the desk. Like I said, I will upload this into the file section for you guys, so if you want, you can use this if you're just not finding a desk that's going to work. All right. So of course, we want to really start this off. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop in the major elements to start off with, the top, the legs, the cabinets. So we're going to go to create polygon primitives. Remember, polygon primitives is what we want, right? And we want a cube because this, like the end table, is a bunch of boxes. So let's drop a cube in here. All right. This will be the tabletop. So we'll hit, and it's already in object mode, right? That green wireframe. Remember, if you hold down your right mouse button over your object, so my cursor's over my object, and I hold down right mouse button, it brings up your marking menu for selection types, right? Object, that's your object selection. That allows you to manipulate this thing at the object level. You can scale and move the whole object. Edges, vertices, and faces are really about selecting specific vertices, edges, or faces, the smaller components of the object. So we want to stay in object mode though. There we go. R for scale, right? Also remember, Alt left for camera rotate, Alt middle, remember that's just your scroll wheel. You press it down as a lot of you guys don't think you have a three button mouse because you don't have because you have a scroll wheel. The scroll wheel actually is a middle mouse button also. So when I say Alt middle, I'm just saying press the scroll wheel down like a button, and you'll see it moves the camera. And then of course Alt right zooms. Scroll wheel technically zooms, but it's jumpier. So we tend to prefer Alt right, right? Alt right mouse button. So Alt left, Alt middle, Alt right mouse button. All right, there we go. And then of course R for scale, all of those right there. And we can just left click drag on this green box, right? Just to make this smaller. There we go. And we also want to make it wider. Kind of try to get it pretty close to the overall size we see in the picture. There we go. Something like that. Hit W for move, right? W is your quick key for move. I can grab the green arrow to move it straight up. There we go. And now we've got our tabletop. Now, at this point, we don't really need anything else from this tabletop, but I honestly try to save my bevels till later in the process, until I know I'm done with the modeling, right? Bevels are great, but usually you don't have to do them till the end. So I'm going to keep this kind of low res and blocky currently so we can explore other tools and make some of the other modeling functions a little easier. And we'll just kind of do a bevel pass on our next videos for our next class session. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one of these cabinets, and it's going to allow me to talk to you guys about these snap tools. So I'm going to go to create polygon primitive cube again. All right, there we go. I'm going to hit R for scale so I can scale this down a bit. Scale it in a little bit on the red, right? Left click drag on the red. Probably a little bit on the blue as well. And we'll hit W for move. We'll move it over on the red. Remember, we can always mirror this over later on. In fact, we will. Let's see. That's getting pretty close to what we want. Maybe a little bit wider. And I think it's actually pretty good size there. All right. So there we go. We've got our starting point for the desk. All right. So here's the thing. Really on our end table, I just kind of let you eyeball it. Basically because it's your first model. We don't need to worry about the slight trickiness of the snap vertex tool. And honestly, if you're pretty good with eyeballing, you can do it pretty nicely. But I want to make sure you guys know how to do greater precision snapping. It's one of the things we started to see more, right? On our exercise 1 videos, we saw snap to curve. We've seen snap to grid a couple times, and we'll see it a couple more times before we're done this term. But I want to start to show you guys snap to vertex. It's that middle magnet one, right? So you see that magnet with the blue dot? That is our snap to vertex, right? So that all these magnets up here, right, are your snap tools. And we've seen snap to grid already, snap to curve. We'll see make live later on project 6. But this third one, the magnet with the little blue dot, is snap to vertex. Now snap to vertex is actually more powerful than it sounds, right? But I want to show you a little bit about how this actually works. So I am going to go, I'm still in object mode, and you'll notice kind of the cursor changes, the center one changes from like a square to a circle. And if I just left click drag, because right, there's that middle handle, and we've definitely done it on scale a bunch of times, but if you actually grab on the center of the move tool, right, that light blue one, which usually if the snap tool's off, it's a square, but in this case, a circle, that's actually your view move. It moves based on the camera instead of along these constraints, right? The arrows constrained just along one axis. These guys allow you to move it along 2. This one allows you to move it based on the camera itself. So it'll kind of move it relative to the camera plane, right? Your view itself. Now, if I left click drag on this, you'll notice it snaps that center to the closest vertex your cursor goes over. Now, in this case, we can see that's kind of neat, but not exactly what we wanted, right? But you can see that you can just grab this free one and just snap. Now, this works on all selection types. So it works on object. We can go to vertex mode, of course, and select a vertex, and that'll work on vertices, right? We can hold down right mouse button and go to edge, and it'll work on edges. And we can see we can even hold down right mouse button and go to faces, and it will work on faces, right? So snap vertex will snap the center, basically wherever your manipulator's at, of whatever your selection is, whether it's object, vertex, edge, or face, to whatever the closest vertex you move your cursor over is. That's cool to know. It even works with edit pivot, right? So if you hit edit pivot, you can actually even snap your edit pivot, right? And that'll work even at the object level, right? If I go to object level and I hit edit pivot, we can actually change the pivot point, right? So remember, edit pivot, the quick keys for that are insert, actually. Insert is a toggle for it. If you hold down D, it's kind of a sticky key. So it's if you hold down D, you can edit pivot, and then you let go, it's off. And we're going to see more about these things. We've already seen a little bit of them, but we're going to see more as we go on to some of our other projects also. So more to come with this stuff as we get to some later models. But you'll notice that you can actually kind of edit pivot and change and use snap your pivot, right? The position of the manipulator to vertices also with that snap to vertex. So it's kind of cool to see all those things that you could do with it. But there's something else that you could do with this. And this is where it's going to allow us to do the more precision aligning, where if we want this exact top to line up exactly with the bottom of this one, and this exact back to line up with that one, which in this case we do. Not the front, so the front's a little inset, so that's fine. But, and then the side's not quite at that angle either, but for like the top and the back. So I want to do this to faces. So I'm going to hold down, put my cursor over the object. I'm going to hold down right mouse button for face. And I'm going to select this face. And if we just grab that center one, right, because that's that view move, right, it's that center yellow circle right now. It's yellow because it's selected, so it's usually light blue. But if I left click drag, you'll see how it snaps the center of that face to the closest vertex, wherever my cursor's over. You notice how you can move the cursor and the manipulator kind of lags behind it? So as long as you're holding down left mouse button, it'll snap those. But that's not exactly what I wanted. Here's the thing though, we've only been using the center to snap with. What if I use the arrows? Well, here's what's cool. If I hold down left mouse button on the green arrow, because I want to snap this upward, right? That's y-axis or green. So if I hold down my left mouse button, that's the important part. Hold down the left mouse button. Don't left click on it. Hold down your left mouse button on this so it selects it and activates it. So I hold down the left mouse button, and as I move, you'll notice I can move my cursor, right? And you'll see that if I kind of keep moving it up, it'll snap all the way up. If I move it down, it snaps just to that bottom. But you'll notice that it didn't move everywhere because I constrained it just that axis. So if you actually grab one of these single arrows, it will only snap based on that. It'll even do it on these red ones, right? So see how it'll kind of do it based on that? But in particular, these the arrows, the single arrows by themselves are a great way to kind of line stuff up. So once more, I'll do it kind of on this back face here. In this case, I'll do it on the blue, right? So if I left click drag, so you hold down left mouse button and move your cursor, you'll notice it can snap to the closest vertex. So it can snap to its own vertices and make this totally flat. If I move my cursor over here, and you see how since I'm holding down left mouse button, I can move the cursor away from the manipulator. And it snaps to the front, but I can also snap it to the very back. So one more time just to show it, you'll hold down left mouse button and just move your cursor, right? And what it'll do is it'll snap to the closest vertex your cursor's over, or closest to, but it also constrains to just this axis. And that gives you some cool precision snapping if you want to take advantage of that, right? Kind of neat. In this case, maybe I'll move this over a little bit more, maybe move this one a little bit forward. These ones we don't have to snap because you notice how they're not exactly lined up perfectly. But that gives us that cabinetry there. Now, quickly before I finish this video, and then we'll make another video, I just want to put the legs in. So we're going to go to create polygon primitives cube. I'm going to hit R for scale. Scale this down a lot, like so. Scale it up a lot, right? And remember, I was just clicking on left clicking on that center one because that scales all three down at the same time. And then I just select the green to scale this up to make it longer. And then of course we can move it over here, move it forward a bit to kind of get the overall alignment we want. You know, so it probably sticks out a little forward from there, so we can kind of just have it stick out a little bit there. And we can kind of just have it kind of line up right about there. That should work pretty well. All right. Okay. Maybe down a little more because it's kind of a little bit longer. There we go. And then of course, if we want to, we can use our snap to grid here. And I might even just move this in just a little bit. Move that one just a little bit. Yeah, just kind of adjust those a little bit, I think. Actually, that should work. And then of course, what we can do is we can hold down right mouse button over the object, face, right? I can grab this face. And if we want, we can turn that snap to vertex on, right? You'll actually notice V is the sticky key for that. So if you hold down V, it'll turn that on, and then you let it go, and it's off. Of course, you can just turn it on and leave it on too. And of course, what we can do is, since we want to move it straight up but have it snap to this bottom, we left click drag on the green arrow, right? So we hold down left mouse button on it, and we just move that cursor over the vertex. In this case, this one will be the bottom, right? Because it's lined up with the bottom faces. And this just gives you a nice little precision snap functionality. Of course, at this point, since this is fully symmetrical, I can mirror this back. So we can just go to Mesh, and we can do Mirror Options box. And in this case, we'll mirror it on the Z. There we go. Hit Mirror. Combine with originals already on. Cut geometry should be off. Usually that can do weird stuff, so I usually turn that off. You pick the axis you want to mirror it on. In this case, I want Z, mirror on Z. Combine with originals fine, because it'll make them all one object. So we'll mirror it over. There we go. And in this case, you can actually see that, I guess I'd move that forward a little bit. Anyways, but if you need to, you can always make minor adjustments. Remember, you can, if you hold down right mouse button, you go to face mode. And if you double click on a face, it selects the connected faces, and I can just hit W for move and move this back a little bit, right? So very easy once you even mirror something over to kind of do those little tweaks if you want to, right? So remember, if you go to face mode, right, hold down right mouse button face, and you double click on a face, it selects the connected faces. Just like if you double click on an edge, it'll select the edge loop. Now I'm going to hold down right mouse button over the object, and remember, do it over the object you want to work with, because if you do it over, like, say, this one, you see how it makes this the active one? So you have to kind of keep that in mind. So in this case, make sure that the legs are selected. Hold down right mouse button, make sure it's on object mode with your cursor over that. There we go. And then, of course, we can do another mirror, mesh mirror, because the legs are pretty much done. We can bevel them later on. So I'll go to mirror, and then I'll pick x-axis for mirroring. There we go. And those are over the other side. Now, I don't want to mirror this quite yet because there's some work I want to do to it, right? It's going to be easier to mirror these all over later on when it's kind of done. But that'll be a great place to stop for this video.